Hello, viewers of the future. I'm Endragh. We're reading more Color Magic. We're gonna find out how fate is gonna help them fight against. Not fate. The lady is gonna help them fight against fate. And we're really close to done, guys. We don't have much longer. And then I gotta switch to the next book I'm reading, which I already know what I'm reading. But, anyways, let us start. I'll start with the last paragraph from last time, because it wasn't that long. Okay. The door swung open. Garhatra entered, holding a wand in front of him. Behind him were two guards, armed more conveniently with swords. "Ah," he said conversantly. "You are ready, I see." Ready, said a voice inside Rincewind's head. The bottle that the wizard had flung some 8 hours earlier had been hanging in the air, imprisoned by magic in its own personal time field. But during all those hours, the original mana of the spell had been slowly leaking away until the total magical energy was no longer sufficient to hold it against the universe's own powerful normality field. And when that happened, reality snapped back in the matter of microseconds. The visible sign of this was that the bottle suddenly completed the last part of its parabola and burst against the side of the guest master's head, showering the guards with glass and jellyfish wine. Rincewind grabbed Twoflower's arm, kicked the nearest guard in the groin, and dragged the startled tourist into the corridor. Before the stunned Garhatra had sunk to the floor, his two guards were already pounding across. His two guests were already pounding across distant flagstones. Rincewind skidded around a corner and found himself on a balcony that ran around the four sides of a courtyard. Below them, most of the floor of the yard was taken up by an oriental pond in which a few terrapines sunbathed among the lily leaves. And ahead of Rincewind were a couple of very surprised wizards wearing the distinctive dark blue and black robes of trained hydrophobes. One of them, quicker on the uptake than his companions, raised a hand and began the first words of a spell. There was a short, sharp noise by Rincewind's side. Twoflower had spat. The hydrophobe screamed and dropped his hands as though it had been stung. The others didn't have time to move before Rincewind was on. The other didn't have time to move before Rincewind was on him, fist swinging wildly. One stiff punch with the weight of terror behind it sent the man tumbling over the balcony railing and into the pond, which did a very strange thing. The water smacked aside as though a large invisible balloon had been dropped into it, and the hydrophobe hung screaming in his own revulsion field. Twoflower watched him in amazement until Rincewind snatched at his shoulder and indicated a likely-looking passage. They hurried down it, leaving the remaining hydrophobes withering on the floor and snatching at his damp hand. For a while there was some shouting behind them, but they scuttered along a cross corridor and another courtyard and soon left the sound of pursuers behind. Finally, Rincewind picked a safe-looking door, peering around it, found the room beyond to be unoccupied, dragged Twoflower inside, and slammed it behind him. Then he leaned against it, wheezing horribly. We're totally lost in a palace on an island we haven't a hope of leaving," he panted. "And what's more, Hey!" he finished as the sight of the containments of the room filtered up his deranged optic nerves. Twoflower was already staring at the walls, because what was so odd about the room was, it contained the whole universe. Death sat in his garden, running a wheatstone along the edge of his scythe. It was already so sharp that any passing breeze that blew across it was sliced smoothly into two puzzled zephyrs, and although breeze was rare indeed in Death's silent garden, it lay on a shattered plateau overlooking the disk's complex dimensions, and behind it loomed the cold, still, immensely high and brooding mountain of eternity. Swish went the stone. Death hummed a dirge, and tapped one bony foot on the frosty flagstones. Someone approached through the dim orchard where the night apples grew, and then came the sickly sweet smell of crushed lilies. Death looked up angrily and found himself staring into the eyes that were black as the inside of a cat and full of distant stars that had no counterpart among the familiar constellations of the real-time universe. Death and Fate looked at each other. Death grinned. He had no alternatives, of course, being made of implacable bone. The wheatstone sang rhythmically along the blade as he continued his task. "I have a task for you," said Fate. His words drifted across Death's scythe and split tidily into two ribbons of consonants and vowels. "I have tasks enough this day," said Death in a voice as heavy as neutronium. "The White Plague abides even now in Tazadophis, and I am bound there to rescue many of its citizens from his grasp. Such a one has not been seen these 100 years. I am expected to stalk the streets, as is my duty." "I refer to the matter of the little wanderer and the rogue wizard," said Fate softly, seating himself beside Death's black-robed form and staring down at the distant, multi-faced jewels which was the Disc universe as seen from this extra-dimensional vantage point. The scythe ceased its song. "They die in a few hours," said Fate. "It is fated." Death stirred, and the stone began to move again. "I thought you would be pleased," said Fate. Death shrugged. A particular expressive gesture for someone whose visible shape was that of a skeleton. "I did indeed chase them mightily once," he said, "but at last the thought came to me that sooner or later all men must die. Everything dies in the end. I can be robbed, but never denied," I told myself. "Why worry?" I too cannot be cheated," snapped Fate. "So I have heard," said Death, still grinning. "Enough!" snapped Fate, jumping to his feet. "They will die." He vanished in a sheet of blue fire. Death nodded to himself and continued at his work. After some minutes, the edge of the blade seemed to be finished to his satisfaction. He stood up and leveled the scythe at the fat and noisome candle that burned on the edge of the bench, and then, with two deft sweeps, cut the flame into 3 bright slivers. Death grinned. A short while later, he was saddling his white stallion, which lived in the stable at the back of Death's cottage. The beast snuffled at him in a friendly fashion, though it was crimson-eyed and had flanks like oiled silk. It was nevertheless a real flesh and blood horse, and, indeed, was in all probability better treated than most beasts of burden on the Disc. Death was not an unkind master. He weighed very little, and although he often rode back with his saddlebags bulging, they weighed nothing whatsoever. "All these worlds," said Twoflower. "It's fantastic!" Rincewind grunted and continued to prowl warily around the star-filled room. Twoflower turned to a complicated astrolabe, in the center of which was the entire great Atune elephant disc system, wrought in brass and picked out with tiny jewels. Around it, stars and planets wheeled on fine silver wires. "Fantastic!" he said again. On the walls around him, constellations made of tiny phosphorescent sea pearls had been picked out on vast tapestries made of jet-black velvet, giving the room's occupants the impression of floating in the interstellar gulf. Various easels had held huge sketches of Great Atune as viewed from various parts of the circumference, with every mighty scale and cratered pocket meticulously marked in. Okay. Twoflower stared above him with a faraway look in his eyes. Rincewind was deeply troubled. What troubled him most of all were the 2 suits that hung from supporters in the center of the room. He circled them uneasily. They appeared to be made of fine white leather, hung about hung about with straps of brass nozzles and other highly unfamiliar and suspicious contrivances. The leggings ended in huge, thick-soled boots, and the arms were shoved into big, supple gauntlets. Strangest of all were the big copper helmets that were obviously supposed to fit on heavily. Strangest of all were the big copper helmets that were obviously supposed to fit on heavy collars around the necks of the suits. The helmets were certainly useless for protection. A light sword would have no difficulty in splitting them, even if it didn't hit the ridiculous little glass windows in the front. Each helmet had a crest of white feathers on top, which was absolutely no way at all towards which went absolutely no way at all towards improving their overall appearance. Rincewind was beginning to have the glimmerings of a suspicion about these suits. In front of them was a table covered with celestial charts and scraps of parchment covered with figures. Whoever would be wearing these suits, Rincewind decided, was expected to boldly go where no man, other than the occasional luckless sailor who didn't really count, had boldly gone before, and he was now beginning to get not just a suspicion, but a horrible premonition. He turned around and found Twoflower looking at him with speculative expression. "No," began Rincewind urgently. Twoflower ignored him. "The goddess said 2 men were going to be sent over the edge," he said, his eyes gleaming. "And you remember Tethys, the troll, saying you'd need some kind of protection? The Krellins have got over that. These suits are of space armor." "They don't look very roomy to me," said Rincewind hurriedly, and grabbed the tourist by the arm. "So if you just come on, no sense in staying here." "Why must you always panic?" asked Twoflower petulantly. Because the whole of my future life just flashed in front of my eyes, and it didn't take very long. And if you don't move now, I'm going to leave without you, because any second now you're going to suggest that we put on." The door opened. I'm going to adjust my thing. Sorry. The two husky young men stepped into the room. All they were wearing was a pair of woolen pants apiece. One of them was still toweling himself briskly. They both nodded at the two escapees with no apparent surprise. The taller of the 2 men sat down on one of the benches in front of the seats. He beckoned to Rincewind and said, "Oh, good Lord." I'm going to just spell it out because he's not speaking anything Rincewind knows. Question mark. T-Y-O with a mark on it. That's one word. Y-U-R. A with a mark over it. T-L-H with a mark on it. H-O with a mark on it. S-O-O-T-E-N. G-A with a mark over it. T-R-U-N-E-N. Question mark. And this was awkward, because although Rincewind considered himself an expert in most of the tongues of the western segments of the disc, it was the first time he had ever been addressed in Krellin, and he did not understand one word of it. Neither did Twoflower, but that did not stop him stepping forward and taking a breath. The speed of light through a magical aura such as the one that surrounded the disc was quite slow, being not much faster than the speed of sound in less highly tuned universes. But it was still the fastest thing around, with the exception, in moments like this, of Rincewind's mind. In an instant, he became aware that the tourist was about to try his own particular brand of linguistics, which meant that he would speak loudly and slowly in his own language. Rincewind's elbows shot back, knocking the breath from Twoflower's body. When the little man looked up in pain and astonishment, Rincewind caught his eye and pulled an imaginary tongue out of his mouth and cut it with an imaginary pair of scissors. The second Cholanot, for which was the profession of the men whose fate it would shortly be to voyage to greater tune, looked up from the chart table and watched this in puzzlement. His big heroic brow wrinkled with the effort of speech. "Another Krellian? Question mark. H-O with a mark on it. R-Y-U. Latruin, N with a mark over it, O with a mark in it, R-I-I question mark. Like, is it supposed to be like Horulaternort-E? He said. Rincewind smiled and nodded and pushed Twoflower in his general direction. With an inward sigh of relief, he saw the tourist pay sudden attention to a big brass telescope that lay on the table. Exclamation mark! S-O-O-T-E-N! I! Exclamation mark! Commanded the second-seated cellonaut. Rincewind nodded and smiled, and took one of the big copper helmets from the rack and brought it down on the man's head as hard as he possibly could. The cellonaut fell forward with a soft grunt. The other man took one startled step before Twoflower hit him on amateurishly but effectively with the telescope. He crumpled on top of his colleague. Rincewind and Twoflower looked at each other over the carnage. "All right," snapped Rincewind, aware that he had lost some kind of contest, but not entirely certain what it was. "Don't bother to say it. Someone out there is expecting these two guys come out in those suits in the minute. I suppose they thought we were slaves. Help me hide these behind the drapes, and then... "We'd better suit up," said Twoflower, picking up the second helmet. "Yes," said Rincewind. "You know, as soon as I saw these suits, I just knew I'd end up wearing one. Don't ask me how I knew. I suppose it was because it was just about the worst possible thing that was likely to happen." "Well, you said yourself we have no way of escaping," said Twoflower, his voice muffled as he pulled the top half of the suit over his head. "Anything's better than being sacrificed." "As soon as we get a chance, we run for it," said said Rincewind. "Don't get any ideas." He thrust an arm savagely into his suit and banged his head on the helmet. He reflected briefly that someone up there was watching over him. "Thanks a lot," he said bitterly. At the very edge of the city and country of Kroll was a large semicircle amphitheater, with seating for several tens of thousands of people. The arena was only semicircular for the very elegant reason that it overlooked the cloud sea that boiled up from the rimfall far below, and now every seat was occupied, and the crowd was growing restive. It had come to see a double sacrifice, and also the launching of the great bronze spaceship. Neither event had yet materialized. The arch astronomer beckoned the master launch controller to him. "Well," he said, filling a mere 4 letters with a full lexicon of anger and menace. The master launch controller went pale. "No news, Lord," said the launch controller, and added with a bitter brightness, "except that your prominence will be pleased to hear that Gar-Hartra has recovered. That is a fact he may come to regret," said the arch astronomer. "Yes, Lord. How much longer do we have?" The launch control glared at the rapidly climbing sun. 30 minutes, your prominence. After that, Kroll will have revolved around the great Attune tail, and the pointed Voyage will be doomed to spin away into the interpreted gulf. I have already set the automatic controls, so... All right, said the arch astronomer. The arch astronomer said, waving him away. "The launch must go ahead. Maintain the watch on the harbor, of course. When the wretched pair are caught, I will personally take a great deal of pleasure in executing them myself." "Yes, Lord, the arch astronomer frowned. "What else have you got to say, man?" The launch control swallowed. All this was very unfair on him. He was a practical magician rather than a diplomat, and that was why some wiser brains had seen to it that he would be the one to pass on the news. "A monster has come out of the sea, and it's attacking the ship in the harbor," he said. "A runner just arrived from there." "A big monster?" said the arch astronomer. "Not particularly, although it is said to be exceptionally fierce, Lord." The ruler of Kroll and the circumference considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "I feel like I'm missing something. Hold on. I feel like I should have said. I feel like I didn't read a part. And I could have sworn there was some part that I might have read it and I just didn't remember it? No, not that. I guess I did read it. I just thought I had. Okay. Alright, never mind. There's just something. I'll tell you in a bit. Hold on. I'll tell you in a bit. Okay. I'll tell you later. The ruler of Krull and the circumference considered this for a moment, then shrugged. The sea is full of monsters, he said. It is one of its prime attributes. Have it dealt with. And, Master Launch Controller? Lord? If I am further vexed, you will recall that 2 people are due to be sacrificed. I may feel generous and increase the numbers. Yes, Lord, the Master Launch Controller scuttered away, relieved to be out of the autocraft's sight. And that's where we'll end it. So Rincewind and Twoflower are going to be in the outfits, and they're going to head out and hopefully not get on the ship. You know how it is. Yeah, I feel like I missed a part, and I don't know where or how, and maybe I didn't, but I'll explain it later. Yeah, I guess I didn't miss it. Alright. I just remember a part, but, anyways. So, this has been The Color of Magic. I've been Endragh. I hope it brought a smile to your face. Yeah, we're getting close. Like, I feel like there's gonna probably be... let's see, how many pages did I read through? Nope, I read that section. Okay. No, wait, I didn't read that section. So I read through a good chunk, so I mean, I feel like I've got maybe 1, maybe 2 episodes left, and then we'll be done with this book. Actually, probably less than that. It'll probably be all just next episode, and we'll be finished. So, I've been Endragh, like I said. I hope I brought a smile to your face, and I will see you next time for maybe ending? I don't know. We'll see. Night-night, guys.